beauties. I decided to do the history of Moses. I wanted to start off with that one as far as, any Bible related stories or, religious. Probably because it's one of the better known stories, I think. That and, Noah, and then of course the crucifixion, I think, are the top stories that are, no matter what denomination you are taught. I myself have been to many different churches. My parents felt that me and my sister should have the ability to choose what religion we wanted to follow. I haven't been to all, but I have been to quite a few, ranging from your traditional, Baptist and Pentecostal and Methodist. I even went to an Episcopal church once, to quite out there. The ones that believe that stick your hand in a basket with snakes, and if the snake bites you and you die, you sinned. That was fun. Didn't go there long at all. I even been to the church where Benny Hinn preached. Great orator. Don't necessarily follow his philosophy, but he was a very good orator, and I gave it an open mind. There was just a few things that happened that I was like, I'm done. Really don't want to get into a big discussion over religion, because that can create all kinds of havoc. Politics and religion, not things you should discuss. But, the history part, I think, is, I've got this strand. The history part, I think, is fairly safe. Science has made all sorts of attempts to discredit, particularly the story of the Exodus. Even so far as to saying that the Red Sea, having a great deal of reeds and everything, and there's a narrow part which supposedly Moses had gone to, and it wasn't so much that he parted the seas as it was winds coming through and dispersing the water over this narrow stretch of land. I tend to go more by what the Bible says. I do kind of feel religion and science go hand in hand. The whole, everybody's like, oh, well, the Big Bang Theory. Well, who's to say God didn't create that? You know, you can't say that it didn't, and that the civilization on Earth will end once the sun dies out, which is in the process of. We know it's got sunspots. Who's to say that isn't from God? So, science can make attempts at disproving, but I think they're just attempts myself. Anyway, I have my notes. The time period for Moses was 1392 BCE to 1272 BCE. And where that kind of comes into, because, you know, you look at that and you're like, well, he was 80. No. He died at 120. Because you have the BC, you have the AD. What a lot of people don't realize is that chunk of time in between, because it's before Christ and after death. You have that time where Christ was alive and walking the earth. So that gets a little tricky. Moses was the son of, I do need my glasses for this one, Amram and Jochebed. Could be saying that wrong. They were of the tribe of Levi. At that time, Hebrews were broken down into tribes, much like an American Indian. They were all Hebrew, like the American Indians were all Indian, but they came from separate things. You know, you have the tribe of Levi, you have the tribe of Joseph, of Daniel. I don't remember them all. I think there's 12, if memory serves me correctly. Moses had siblings. He had a sister Miriam and a brother Aaron. He was born in Egypt during a time when the Israelites, also known as the Hebrews, had become a threat to the Egyptians because their population was just so vast. Just marking off so that I don't lose my place. The Pharaoh had ordered that all new male births were to be thrown into the Nile to drown. So his parents took him and placed him in a waterproof basket and kind of hid him among the tall grass and reeds in the Nile. Miriam hid and kept an eye out on him. And nearby there was a group of women and servants that were bathing. And the Pharaoh's daughter heard Moses crying. And so she went over, found him in the basket, and rescued him. And she had named him Moses because it means drawn from the water. and she had always wanted a son. So she was quite ecstatic and made sure he had everything. Being Pharaoh's daughter, it was kind of a lap of luxury. He was highly educated because of his upbringing. And as he got older, he was very aware of his Hebrew roots and everything, and had such compassion for the Hebrew slaves that when he saw an Egyptian master brutally beating a slave, he impulsively jumped in and killed the Egyptian. So because of that, he feared the Pharaoh's punishment and fled from Egypt to the desert of Midian, of which he became a shepherd for a Midian priest, Jethro, and later he married Jethro's daughter, Zipporah. While tending the flocks, he saw a burning bush, and it wasn't turning to ash. And so, as he got closer, he heard a voice coming from the bush telling him that he was chosen to lead the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt. He was also instructed to declare the unity of God to the people. Sorry, there is a fly. When we let all three of the babies out, Marley, once he's, he wants to be outside, but he doesn't want to be out there without me or my husband. So he'll burst through the door and the door will stay open because you don't realize he's done it. And so I have flies in here. They drive me insane. Heard the voice, the unity of God. Okay. At the time, most Israelites worshipped many gods. Just like the Romans and the Egyptians, and you had all these different gods. You had Isis and Ra, and you had Poseidon. Even the Greeks had Athena and all this. So it was a common practice. But Moses was instructed to tell them there was only one God, which wasn't a popular belief at all. And Moses, feeling very unworthy of the task at hand, and he lacked the confidence and, just the immense responsibility of what he was being asked to do. He was assured that his brother Aaron would, because Aaron was supposed to be more, talkative and everything, that he would be the spokesperson for the Israelites and to the Pharaoh. Moses returned back to Egypt to persuade the Hebrews to organize and, for a trip, from the Egyptian slave drivers. And with Aaron, Moses informed the Pharaoh that God demanded that the Pharaoh let the Hebrews free. And the Pharaoh refused he refused to obey, which brought about 9 very terrible plagues. The water turning into blood, the frogs, the gnats, the flies, disease to their cattle, hail, boils, locusts, and darkness, constant darkness. And Moses brought about these plagues using a miraculous staff that he had, that he received from God as a sign of his authority. Each of the plagues was severe to the Egyptians while sparing the Israelites. The 10th plague is also known as the story of Passover. And that's where God sent the angel of death to kill all firstborn sons of the Egyptians. So the Israelites protected themselves by painting lamb's blood in their doorways, so the angel of death would know to pass over those homes. So finally, this is what broke the Pharaoh down. And he was like, go, immediately, go. But you have to go now. Moses led them out, and they were a very undisciplined group, of which, during the 40 years in the wilderness, he shaped into a nation. But not without issue. Moses led them to Mount Sinai, which was also Mount. Hang on, because I know I had that in my notes. Because it's also Mount Horeb is also pretty much the same as Mount Sinai. It's where God first revealed himself to Moses through the burning bush. And so Moses ascended Mount Sinai after being summoned by God. And that's where he received the stone tablets with the commandments on there. At the time, the Israelites were very inspired by this. And they agreed to the covenant, which basically the covenant is an agreement between people and God. Not exactly something you want to break. Not without peril. Now, during the 40 years, there were many miracles that were happening, such as when they were stopped in front of the Red Sea. They were being chased by Egyptian soldiers because the Pharaoh, after he was like, go, leave immediately, after they left, was like, things are better. I changed my mind. So he sent soldiers after them. And so basically Moses raised his staff and the waters parted. And once they were safely across, okay, the water crashed back down, and that drowned a lot of the soldiers. And when the food supplies were running out, God sent down manna, which is spiritual food, every day for their nourishment. And also during all this time, Moses is having to hear all the complaints about food, about the climate, about how slow their progress was getting to the promised land. They even claimed that things were better in Egypt than they were on this trip. And when they were in need of water, God told Moses to speak to a rock, and water would spring from it. Well, by this point, Moses is just kind of all worn down by all the complaining that he's dealing with. That instead of doing as he was told to do, he struck the rock with the staff. And that had some repercussions of its own, which I'll get into in a moment. Now, God did add to the Ten Commandments, and he did this through Moses, giving him a code of law which regulated the social and religious lives of the people, and this was known as the Book of the Covenant, in which it was protected in a specifically made box known as the Ark of the Covenant, which throughout history many people have tried to locate the Ark of the Covenant, to no avail. Right up there with everybody trying to find the ark that Noah built. In the shroud that Christ was wrapped in after his crucifixion. These are all specific relics that are mentioned throughout the Bible that people have searched for, and because they've been unable to find, the Ark or the Ark of the Covenant or the chalice that Christ drank from, or even the spear of destiny, which is the spear that pierced the side of Christ when he was on the cross. Because people can't find these specific relics, it makes them question their faith. And that's the thing with faith. It's not tangible. You can't just reach out and grab it or touch it. You have to have faith that it's there. My dad and we got into a discussion on religion. It was around Easter time, and there was a program on. I was like 17 or 18 years old, and it showed Christ being beaten with what is known as a cat of nine tails. And it was these leather strips that on the ends of it had very sharp rock. So it was just slashing right into his back. And my dad was like, the Romans at that time wouldn't have used something like that. They, didn't have that. I went through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, specifically looking, and it does. I forget which book it was now. I mean, that was many moons ago. I'd have to look specifically again. But I found in the Bible where it said the cat of the nine tails and gave a description of it was used. And it's probably the only time my dad ever admitted he was wrong, especially something with relating to history. But that's what I do. When I hear something, I go and I research and I go to my sources. Anything religious, straight to the Bible. If it's in the Bible, we're good. If it's not in there, sorry. So back to Moses, after getting on that little tangent. The specific details of the Book of the Covenant were spoken through Moses, by God. And then, as they approached Canaan, which is the Promised Land, Moses was not permitted to lead the Israelites there because of his disobedience during the wandering. It said that the Promised Land was then given to the children of the Israelites. And Moses died in the land of Moab. Like I said, he was 120 years old. And all this is recounted in the books of Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus. So it's all stuff that you can go check out. But that's pretty much the history on Moses. I would like to do more historical stories in the Bible as well. If there's a specific story that you want to hear, with the details of that story, just like with Moses, leave me a comment and I'll look into it. Because there's some remarkable stories that throughout the years, plus my daughter, when she was little, she always wanted to hear stories from the Bible. And I didn't have a children's Bible. So that was real fun, trying to read to her from the Bible and try to edit at the same time. Because there was just things, she wasn't ready to hear. A lot of violence and everything, because we're talking, she was like 4 or 5 years old. So, I needed to make sure it was age appropriate. And at the time, I looked and looked and looked and could not find a children's Bible with stories. And I even went to some Christian bookstores and still wasn't able, found all kinds of Bibles, books to help you understand the Bible, and religious stories in itself, like the Left Behind series, which was good because I was able to find the last book that we didn't have. But, and it's like right now, I'm finding children's biblical storybooks. So I'm like, I don't have any grandchildren, but I'm thinking about getting one so that when time comes, I have one on hand so that I can do the stories without having to do what I did with my daughter. She's always had a very natural curiosity regarding religion. And, you know, she sings in the choir, and she is just so involved. Her relationship with God is amazing. But if there's anything specific, leave me a comment. If you like what you saw, ring the bell, smash the thumbs up, and just let me know if there's a specific story from the Bible you want to hear about. Till then, bye, my beauties.